It was supposed to be just another quiet evening. The kind of night where the sky glows amber as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows on cracked sidewalks and sleepy intersections. The kind of night where a young man texts his father, heading home, "Pops," and means it. But for Isaiah Carter, that message would never be delivered. He was 23, sharp-minded, soft-spoken, the kind of young man who turned heads not because he was loud, but because he was present, grounded, focused, the kind of son every father prays for. His car, an old silver Honda with a squeaky driver's side door and a missing hubcap, rolled to a gentle stop along the edge of suburban strip mall. The taillight was busted, sure, but he wasn't speeding. No music blaring, no smoke, no slurred speech. Just a future doctor on his way home from volunteering at a local clinic. The patrol car pulled in behind him, lights flashing, siren chirping. The tension that so many young black men know all too well instantly settled into the air like fog. And then came Detective Brian Holt, 10 years on the force. White, known for his temper, whispered about for his quick draw, praised by some, feared by others. He approached the car with hand already hovering near his weapon. Not caution, intention. License and registration, he barked. Isaiah, ever composed, nodded calmly. Yes, sir. It's right here in my... 5 shots. 5. In less than a breath, his body jolted backward, blood splattering across the windshield, soaking the collar of the white button-down his father had ironed that morning. His head slumped forward. His phone slipped to the floorboard, still unlocked on the last text he'd ever type. Heading home, Pops. There were no warning shouts, no weapon drawn in return, no threat, no raised voice, just death. When paramedics arrived, Isaiah was still belted into the seat, wallet open in his lap, hands limp, heart still. At the hospital, Reuben Carter, his father, burst through the doors, breathless and praying for a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a white sheet, not the white lab coat Isaiah was supposed to wear in a few weeks at Howard Medical School. Not the one he had dreamed about since he was 8 years old. No, this was a death shroud, sterile, suffocating, and final. Reuben wasn't allowed to see the footage. The dash cam had glitched. The body cam had malfunctioned. The official report? The officer feared for his life. And just like that, the system turned the page. No charges, no trial, no accountability. Detective Holt was placed on paid leave by sundown. Isaiah Carter was placed 6 feet underground by the end of the week. But while the city moved on, Reuben Carter did not. Because how could he? His son, his boy, the kid who skipped parties to tutor his classmates, who mowed the neighbor's lawn for free, who wore his mother's old cross around his neck every day, was gone. And the man who killed him was being protected by policy. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was an execution in broad daylight, buried beneath legalese and red tape. And the system thought Reuben would grieve, forgive, and fade quietly into the shadows. But they were wrong, because Reuben Carter wasn't just mourning. He was transforming. Before the gunshots, before the blood, before the photo on the evening news, there was Isaiah Carter. And oh, what a life he lived. Not one built on privilege or protection, but on grit and love. Born and raised in the heart of Willow Bend, a working-class neighborhood tucked between 2 bus lines and a shuttered steel plant, Isaiah knew the taste of struggle. But he never let it define him, because he had Reuben, a single father, a warehouse worker by day, a cook, a mentor, a man who wore his grief quietly and his pride loudly. At least when it came to his son. Reuben wasn't rich in dollars, but in dedication, in fatherhood, he was wealthy beyond measure. From the moment Isaiah could walk, Reuben taught him 2 things. Your name is your promise, and your heart is your guide. And Isaiah listened. At 5, he was reading medical books from the thrift store like they were comic strips. At 7, he brought home an injured bird and tried to splint its wing with a popsicle stick. By 11, he was already shadowing nurses at the community health fair, wide-eyed and taking notes like his future depended on it. Because in many ways it did. Isaiah Carter had dreams that burned brighter than the city lights. He wasn't chasing fame or clout or riches. He wanted to heal. He wanted to wear that white coat, not because it made him look important, but because he believed it was his responsibility. In high school, he wasn't just top of his class, he was the class. The kind of student who stayed after to help others study. The one who showed up early for extra credit and stayed late to clean up after the science fair. The one who organized winter coat drives and passed out hygiene kits on Sundays. When he received his acceptance letter to Howard University School of Medicine, Reuben cried. Not because he was surprised, but because his boy was going to walk into a future he never had the chance to touch. He told Isaiah that night, "You're going to save people one day, son." Isaiah smiled, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Already started. With you." They were inseparable. Father and son, man and mirror. They played chess every Friday night, argued over who made the best cornbread. Always Reuben, but Isaiah liked to push his luck and quoted scenes from old movies until the walls rang with laughter. Photos lined every shelf of their small home. Isaiah in his debate blazer. Isaiah holding a microscope. Isaiah holding up his cousin at the family barbecue like the boy was royalty. But no photo meant more than the one that Reuben kept beside his bed. Isaiah, wearing a crisp button-down, stethoscope slung casually around his neck, standing in front of Howard's medical library, eyes blazing with quiet purpose. That was his legacy. Not violence, not threat, not suspect, but hope. And the bond between father and son? Unbreakable, sacred, steel forged in every moment of sacrifice and joy. Reuben once said, "I raised a healer, not a fighter." But the world saw something else. It saw brown skin behind the wheel of a car with a busted taillight, and pulled a trigger faster than it blinked. And in the instant that Isaiah Carter's heart stopped, so did Reuben's world. The city could reduce Isaiah to a file, a case, a press release, but we won't. We remember the boy who carried bandages in his backpack, just in case. The young man who gave his bus money to strangers and walked home instead. The future doctor who never once forgot the block he came from and never let that block forget its worth. Isaiah Carter was more than a victim. He was a son, a scholar, a servant to his community, a boy who should be wearing a white coat, not lying beneath a white sheet. And as Reuben stared at that coat, still hanging in the closet, untouched, something inside him broke, not with a scream, not with a punch, but with a silence so deep it rearranged his soul. You would think, after killing a man's only son, the very least they'd give him is answers. But the system? It didn't even give Reuben Carter that. No officer showed up at his door with trembling hands and apologies. No phone call came from the precinct offering condolences. Instead, a hospital administrator, clipboard in hand, told him coldly, mechanically, "Your son didn't make it." That was it. No explanation. No remorse. No dignity. Reuben rushed to the scene anyway, desperate for some sliver of truth. But by the time he arrived, Isaiah's body was already gone. The pavement still gleamed, wet with his blood. Flashing lights painted the buildings red and blue, but no one looked him in the eye. Just yellow tape and silence. He stood there, fists clenched, mouth dry, soul screaming, as if somehow, if he looked hard enough, he could rewind time. But there was no rewind. Only the weight of an unthinkable reality pressing down on his chest. Then came the lies. The dash cam footage from Detective Holt's cruiser? Inconclusive, they said. The body cam? Technical failure. Static. Skip timestamps. No audio. No video. Only after protests started did they finally name the officer, Brian Holt, a man with a history of aggressive stops and questionable discretion, but never once reprimanded. Instead of handcuffs, he got paid administrative leave. Instead of jail, he got a vacation. And Reuben? He got to plan his son's funeral. When he asked the district attorney about charges, they told him the investigation was ongoing. But it wasn't. It was over before it began. A week later, a press conference was held. A DA in a tailored suit stood stiffly behind a podium and announced, "Detective Holt acted within departmental policy. No charges will be filed." And just like that, the man who murdered Isaiah Carter walked free. Not suspended, not fired, cleared. They blamed officer perception of threat, as if Isaiah had lunged at him, as if Isaiah had resisted. as if Isaiah hadn't been doing exactly what he was told, reaching for his license, the very thing he was asked to do. But perception in this country is often dictated by color. And Isaiah? He was the wrong color to be nervous, the wrong color to reach slowly, the wrong color to make a cop feel safe. The media gave the story 3 paragraphs. Then they moved on. Another black man, another traffic stop, another father left holding a folded white coat instead of a graduation cap. And Reuben Carter sat in his living room, curtains drawn, staring at nothing. The plates in the sink stacked high. The fridge emptied. The phone rang, but he didn't answer. What was there to say? His son had done everything right. Isaiah had followed every rule, earned every honor. He was heading to Howard Medical School, for God's sake. But in the eyes of the system, none of that mattered. The minute Holt pulled the trigger, Isaiah wasn't a scholar anymore. He was a statistic. Reuben wandered through Isaiah's bedroom at night, brushing his fingers along his son's textbooks. Biology, anatomy, chemistry, notes written in neat margins, diagrams, highlights, the dreams of a healer gone cold. And there, in the closet, hung Isaiah's white coat, still pressed, still waiting. Reuben would sometimes take it out and lay it on the bed. He'd sit beside it, hands folded, eyes hollow. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The grief had sunk too deep. The world said, move on. But how? How do you move on when your whole world has a bullet hole in it? The system didn't just kill Isaiah that night on the side of the road. It killed him again in the courtroom, again in the DA's statement, again in the quiet when no one showed up to ask Reuben if he was okay. Justice was never coming. It had been boxed up, filed away, hidden behind legal jargon and press briefings. And for Reuben Carter, that was the moment something shifted, not with anger, but with clarity. He saw the truth for what it was, raw, undeniable. The law didn't care. The system had failed. And if there was ever going to be balance, he would have to be the one to deliver it. The chapel was packed wall to wall, every pew full, every aisle crowded, every corner of the room heavy with breathless sorrow. But it still wasn't enough. People stood outside, leaned against the walls, sat on folding chairs dragged in at the last minute. No one wanted to miss it, because this wasn't just a funeral. It was a reckoning dressed in black. At the front of the room sat the casket, sleek, polished, painfully beautiful in a way that felt wrong, because it held a young man who wasn't supposed to be there. Isaiah Carter was supposed to be in a lab, in a lecture hall, in a clinic with a name tag that said Dr. Carter, not lying beneath a polished box and the weight of a community's grief. A large photograph stood beside the casket. Isaiah, smiling, arms folded, white coat draped over his shoulder, stethoscope dangling like a promise. That smile? It was the kind that made you believe in tomorrow. And now that tomorrow was gone. Reuben Carter sat in the front row, stone still. His hands gripped the edge of the pew, knuckles white, suit too tight across his chest. He hadn't worn that suit since his own mother's funeral. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just stared at the coffin, at the photo, at a future that had been stolen and buried in the same breath. Behind him, friends whispered broken prayers. A violin wept softly near the pulpit. Somewhere in the back, a child cried, the high, sharp cry of someone too young to understand but too human not to feel. When the pastor invited mourners to speak, the line stretched quickly. A teacher, a coach, a classmate, a nurse from the clinic. They all stood up, hands shaking, voices cracking, sharing stories of the boy who never missed a day, who stayed after school to help, who brought groceries to elderly neighbors without being asked. They didn't say his name like it was gone. They said it like it still echoed down hallways and across basketball courts. Isaiah was a light. He made people believe they could be better. He was going to change the world. No one talked about how he died. They didn't have to. It was in the trembling of their hands, the pauses between sentences, the way their eyes darted to the casket like it might suddenly disappear if they just looked hard enough. Outside, the sun blazed in a sky far too bright for such a day. As the procession moved to the burial ground, the mood grew heavier, not quieter but denser, like a storm cloud trapped beneath the skin. When they lowered the casket into the earth, it was with painful slowness. Every creak of the pulley, every groan of the straps, was a reminder of how permanent this was. Reuben stood just inches from the grave, holding something in his hands. Isaiah's white coat. Clean, pressed, folded. He stared at it for a long time, not moving, not breathing, just staring like he could will it to rise, like he could still give it to Isaiah, place it on his shoulders, and say, "Now go heal the world." Then, without a word, he draped it gently over the casket. His hands trembled, his jaw clenched, but he didn't cry. Not yet. That's when someone stepped forward. A man in uniform, a bouquet of lilies in his hand. Detective Brian Holt. He said nothing, just tucked a card between the stems and placed the flowers beside the grave. Reuben stared, not at the man, at the card. Then, slowly, silently, he tore it to pieces, took out a lighter, and set it on fire. The flame crackled. Smoke curled. The ashes floated down to the fresh mound of dirt like black snow. He didn't say a word. He just turned around and walked away. Because what do you say to a world that kills your son and calls it policy? What do you say to the man who pulled the trigger and gets to live while you bury your only child? Reuben said nothing, because the time for words had passed. Now, only action remained. Grief can twist a man, but silence? Silence will reshape him. After the funeral, Reuben Carter became a shadow. The man who once filled rooms with warmth and stories, who taught his son to play chess and argue politics over cornbread, stopped speaking altogether. Not to his neighbors, not to the pastor who kept calling, not even to himself. He moved through the house like a ghost, drifting past untouched laundry, unopened mail, and stacks of bills collecting dust. The stove stayed cold. The TV remained off. The only sound was the quiet creak of floorboards beneath tired feet. He slept in Isaiah's room. Each night, he sat on the edge of that neatly made bed, staring at the white coat still hanging in the closet like it was waiting to be worn. Sometimes he'd reach for it, fingertips brushing the sleeve, pretending, if only for a second, that Isaiah might walk through the door and say, "Hey, Pops, I'm home." But he never did. Then, one day, Reuben stopped reaching for the coat. He started reaching for something else. Not a weapon. Not yet. A notebook. He began writing things down. Not thoughts. Not grief. Names. Addresses. Routines. He watched the local news religiously. Not for world events, but for one man, Detective Brian Holt. Where he worked. Where he drank his coffee. Which gym he visited. What time he left his home. Reuben wasn't reacting anymore. He was planning. He shaved his face for the first time in weeks, trimmed the gray stubble from his jaw, stood in front of the mirror, and practiced his smile. Not too wide, not too tight, just enough to say, "I'm harmless." He watched videos of community mentors, studied their body language, mimicked their warmth, learned to nod without seeming suspicious, to ask questions without sounding prying, to blend in. Then he hit the thrift stores, bought a few bright polos, a cheap watch, slim jeans that made him look 10 years younger, wore a backpack like a school volunteer, a lanyard with no ID, a story with no cracks, and he gave himself a new name. Ray Johnson. Friendly. Forgettable. Exactly what he needed to be. He picked a town 2 counties over, far enough from the shooting, but close enough to stay near Holt's family. There was a youth program there, desperate for male volunteers. The kind that didn't ask too many questions, especially from someone who showed up smiling and said he wanted to give back. And so Ray Johnson was born. He filled out the forms, attended the orientation, waved at staff, high-fived kids. For a few weeks, he was just there, helping clean up, passing out snacks, clapping during after-school basketball games. And then, finally, he saw him. Jacob Holt, 16, tall, tense, carried the same cold blue eyes as his father, walked with his shoulders tight, jaw clenched like someone used to being invisible. The last name on the attendance sheet was all the confirmation Reuben needed, but it was the way the boy flinched at kindness that told him the truth. This wasn't just Brian Holt's son. This was the first step. Reuben didn't rush it. He played the long game. He complimented Jacob's jump shot, asked about music, told stories about growing up without a mom, which this time was true. He never pushed, never pried, just listened. And Jacob? He leaned in, bit by bit, Week by week, the walls came down. One afternoon, after group, Jacob lingered near the vending machine. He looked at Reuben, really looked at him, and muttered, "I wish my dad was more like you." Reuben smiled softly, placed a hand on the boy's back, and said nothing, because that was the moment. Not the drive, not the woods, not the gun. This, the moment of trust. The boy was his now. They began going on weekend outings. To the arcade, to the movies. Once, even to a hiking trail just outside town. No one questioned it. Ray Johnson was a model mentor. And Jacob? A troubled teen, finally opening up. What would go wrong? Then came the Saturday. Cool, clear, quiet. Reuben told Jacob it was a special trip. Just the two of them. He'd pick him up early. Jacob tossed his backpack in the back seat and climbed in. They drove for hours. Off highways. Down gravel paths. Into a nature reserve where cell signal died and the world faded away. When they reached the clearing, birds scattered. The wind was soft. The car engine ticked as it cooled. Jacob looked out the window, half asleep. And that's when Reuben Carter stepped out of the driver's seat and didn't return. Only one of them left that forest. 3 days later, hikers found Jacob Holt's body. Face pale, hands zip-tied behind his back. One clean bullet wound to the head, execution style. No signs of struggle. No DNA. No footprints. No weapon. The only thing missing? His phone. Inside a zippered pocket of Jacob's backpack, police found a hidden burner device. Only one voicemail had been saved. 7 words. That was for Isaiah. One down. No breathing. No background. Just a declaration. And somewhere across town, Reuben Carter sat in his kitchen. Milk swirling in a bowl of soggy cereal. Marcus's old spoon, the one with the bent handle, resting gently in his hand. The news played softly in the background. They showed Jacob's photo. They used the word tragedy. But Reuben? He didn't flinch. He just stirred and smiled. Because now, they understood what loss felt like. The town was reeling. A teenage boy. Missing, then murdered. No suspect. No motive. No clue. But for Reuben Carter, it was already yesterday's chapter. Because Jacob Holt was never the endgame. He was the beginning. The match struck against years of silent rage. Now the fire had started. And Reuben? He was already watching the next one. Savannah Holt, 17, dance team captain, social media darling, daddy's girl. While the police scrambled to make sense of Jacob's execution, she was out posting filtered selfies and prom countdowns, blissfully unaware that her name was already underlined in a notebook. Reuben had studied her for weeks. He knew her class schedule, her favorite coffee order, the after-school diner she visited every Thursday. He tracked her parking habits, her Instagram stories, her playlists. He knew what time she left the house and when she ignored calls from her mother. This wasn't obsession. It was architecture, the second step in a plan built on precision, not emotion. And then came prom night, the perfect storm of emotion and routine. A crowded hotel ballroom, distracted parents, teens glowing with innocence and hairspray. No suspicion, no sados. Reuben slipped into the background with ease. He wore the uniform of a local valet company. Crisp black slacks, white gloves, red vest. He had observed the drop-off layout days prior. Watch how the cars lined up, where the real valets went to smoke, where the cameras didn't quite reach. And when Savannah arrived, he didn't need to approach. Just note the car, note the route, note the exit. The real work came later, after the dancing, after the photos under chandeliers, after the last chorus of Don't Stop Believin' to. Savannah and her date left around 11:45 p.m., laughing, leaning on each other, giddy from nothing but youth and glitter. They drove up to a quiet scenic overlook just outside the city, a popular spot for couples seeking a moment alone before the chaos of after-parties. Reuben followed from a distance. Headlights dimmed, radio off, footsteps silent. He waited until the boy, her date, got out of the car. One fast blow to the side of the head. He'd wake up hours later with a concussion and no memory. By the time anyone realized Savannah Holt was missing, she was already gone. The search was immediate. Flyers, press conferences, drones scanning treetops. Her classmates cried on TV. Her mother collapsed in a hallway interview. And Brian Holt? The man who once drew his weapon faster than breath now shook behind closed blinds. Because he knew. Deep down he knew. 2 days later, hikers found Savannah. Her body was posed in a drainage culvert near the base of a hiking trail. She was laid gently, her hands folded. No brucis, no strage, just one clean cut across the throat. And, in her hand, a black and white photo. Isaiah Carter, smiling in his white coat. Untouched, centered, left with reverence. The news broke like thunder. 2 of Officer Holt's children gone. Executed, left with surgical precision. And now, panic swallowed the city whole. The police department went into lockdown. The FBI sent liaisons. The mayor called for calm, but his voice cracked like glass. This wasn't a fluke. This was a campaign. A war waged by a man who didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be felt. Reporters speculated wildly. Was it domestic terror? Gang retaliation? A serial killer with a political agenda? But Reuben didn't care what they said. The only face he wanted to see was Brian Holt's. And when it finally appeared on the screen, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling, Reuben knew it was working. Detective Holt unraveled in real time. He stood outside the precinct, cameras flashing, and lost control. He screamed about anti-police rhetoric, blamed activists, the media, the mayor. He shook. He sobbed. He cursed the sky. It was supposed to be a calm statement, a plea for peace. Instead, it became a public meltdown. The department acted quickly, placed him on indefinite leave, secured his badge, took his gun, pulled him from the spotlight, and shoved him into a locked room. But it didn't help, because Brian Holt's real prison wasn't made of walls. It was made of loss. At home, he spiraled, drank before noon, punched holes in walls, stared at family photos until his vision blurred. Michelle, his wife, tried to help, tried to love him through it, tried to understand how a man could fall so far. But he wasn't the man she married anymore. He was a shell, a ticking clock, a man haunted by a name he couldn't forget. Isaiah Carter. One night, Michelle found him passed out in the backyard, cradling a shotgun, muttering nonsense. She packed a bag the next day. But Reuben wasn't done, because Michelle Holt wasn't innocent. She slept in comfort while Reuben's boy laid in the dirt. She hosted brunches, posted vacations, clung to privilege like a life vest, and said nothing when her husband murdered an unarmed boy. So Reuben left a gift on her doorstep. A wine bottle, wrapped in tissue paper. No note, no message, just a promise. That night, Michelle drank a single glass. 10 minutes later, she collapsed in the kitchen. Paramedics found her on the floor, twitching, gasping. Beside her body was a photo, again Isaiah, in his white coat, looking up at a future that would never come. The police found no prints. No residuo. Just a man in a landscaping uniform walking casually away on a grainy security camera, his face just out of frame. The news tried to spin it as tragedy. But the people? They knew. 3 deaths. 1 family. And a silence more deafening than any bullet. Reuben Carter didn't laugh. Didn't cry. Didn't celebrate. He sat alone at Isaiah's desk, scribbling names, crossing out lines, packing evidence into a neat brown box labeled Legacy. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need applause. He needed them to feel it, to taste the fear, to sit in the silence, to know the ache of losing everything and getting nothing in return. The city had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace, only pressure. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the sky was holding its breath. Detective Brian Holt was no longer a detective. His badge had been stripped. His home was a fortress now, locks on every door, cameras on every wall, whiskey on every countertop. And still, he didn't feel safe, because he knew something the rest of the world was only starting to understand. This wasn't over. And then, one morning it came. A plain brown box, hand-delivered to a small, black-owned news station on the edge of the city. No return address. No postage error. Just a careful, deliberate placement beneath a pile of local campaign flyers. Inside, the truth. A flash drive. Stacks of photographs. Detail maps. And a video diary that would change the narrative forever. The drive flickered to life in the station's editing suite. First footage, Low-res clips of Ray Johnson, Reuben in disguise, walking the halls of the youth center with Jacob Holt, laughing, talking, mentoring, then clips from a hiking trail, backpacks, smiles, silence, then a still image, Savannah Holt at prom, the parking map from the Grand Terrace Hotel, Michelle Holt's weekly routine, her grocery lists, her jog schedule, each file meticulously labeled, each photo annotated with timestamps and notes in tight, steady handwriting. Not rage, not chaos, structure. Then came the medical report. Isaiah Carter's autopsy, gunshot wounds, nostraged, clean toxicology, manner of death, homicide circled in red ink. And yet, no trial, no arrest, no justice. The final file was the video. Reuben sat at Isaiah's desk, face gaunt, older than his years, but clear-eyed. A photograph of Isaiah leaned against a stack of books in front of him. He looked at the camera, long and hard. Then, softly, with no emotion, he said, "They killed my son and called it policy." A pause. "I killed theirs and called it pain." Then nothing. The screen faded to black. The newsroom fell silent. Phone stopped ringing. Mouth hung open. No one spoke, because what was there to say? This wasn't a manifesto. It was a mirror, and now the city had no choice but to look into it. The footage was archived, backed up, protected. Reporters debated releasing it to the public. Lawyers argued ethics. Producers whispered warnings. But no one denied its authenticity. This was real. This was the confession. Hours passed. Then news broke. Not from the police. Not from the mayor. From the people. Social media lit up. Hashtags trended. Rumors turned into headlines. And Reuben Carter? He disappeared again, into silence. But this time not to plan, not to hide, to finish. At sunrise the next day, he walked into the cemetery, the same one where Isaiah was buried. He carried 3 things. A bouquet of white lilies, a shoe box, aged and worn, Isaiah's white coat, freshly pressed. He knelt at the grave, placed the flowers at the base. He opened the box. Inside were 23 handwritten letters, one for every year of Isaiah's life. Letters that detailed it all, the grief, the rage, the reckoning. He draped the coat over the headstone, tenderly, like dressing his son for a ceremony that never came. Then he sat down, cross-legged, calm, a pistol resting in his lap. No hesitation, no panique, just peace. He looked to the sky. "I love you, son. I'll see you soon." And then, silence. A single shot echoed across the hills. Birds scattered from the trees. By the time anyone arrived, Reuben was gone. Head bowed, shoulders still, the photo of Isaiah clutched in one hand. The truth, all of it, in the other. They found him at dawn. The light was soft, just brushing the tops of the gravestones. Mist clung to the grass. The air was still. Reuben Carter sat slumped at the base of his son's grave, as if he had simply fallen asleep. But the pistol in his lap told a different story. The shoe box lay beside him, its lid carefully closed. Inside, 23 letters. Each page a confession, a eulogy, a father's last attempt to speak in a world that had stolen his voice. Beside it, Isaiah's white coat fluttered gently in the wind, not stained, not torn, just waiting. And on top of it all, a photo. Isaiah, age 16, caught mid-laugh on a summer day. Head tilted, eyes bright. It was the photo Reuben had kept beside his bed all those sleepless nights. The one he whispered to in the dark. The one he couldn't bear to let go of. Until now. The police arrived in minutes. They followed protocol, documented the scene. But there was nothing left to uncover. No mystery to solve. Reuben had left them everything. The letters, the photos, the plan, the pain. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to escape the label the world would give him. He just ended it, on his terms, beside the only person he had ever truly lived for. By noon, the city erupted. Every major outlet ran with the headline, "Father of slain medical student commits suicide at son's grave." But that headline didn't even scratch the surface, because the real story, the full story, had already reached the public. The confession box, the video, the footage, the names. The silence that followed each act. All of it had been leaked. Strategically, deliberately. And now, there was no turning away. Cable news anchors scrambled for explanations. They called it a vigilante killing spree, a domestic terror act, a tragedy of radicalized grief. But the streets had their own language. Murals of Isaiah appeared on city walls overnight, half in a white coat, half in a graduation cap. Candles were lit beneath courthouse steps. Teddy bears and stethoscopes lined the gates of his old high school. Signs went up at protests. He begged for peace. You gave him policy. This is what happens when justice dies. There are no chance for vengeance. Only the heavy silence of people who understood what it meant to be unheard for too long. And what of Brian Holt? He broke, collapsed under the weight of it all. The public shame, the loss of his children, his wife, the realization that nothing, not even his badge, could protect him now. They found him barefoot in a parking lot, sobbing, muttering fragments of apologies that came too late and meant too little. He was sedated, committed, hidden. No charges were filed. No statements made. His name was quietly removed from public record. Like if they erased him, maybe they could erase what he stood for too. But they couldn't erase Rubin Carter. They couldn't undo what he revealed. The pain he etched into the conscience of a nation. He didn't become a hero. He didn't become a monster. He became something far more haunting. A mirror. In the weeks after, a group of local educators and physicians came together to honor Isaiah. Not Rubin, but the boy at the center of it all. They launched the Isaiah Carter Future Healers Fund, a scholarship for Black students pursuing medicine. Donations poured in, some from doctors, some from others, some from strangers who read one line of a letter and couldn't stop crying. Isaiah's name lived on, not as a victim, but as a vision. Rubin's burial came quietly. No politicians, no cameras, no speeches, just a few neighbors, old co-workers, a teacher from Isaiah's middle school. They stood around the plot beside his son, heads bowed. 2 stones, one for promise, one for pain, and the dirt covered them both the same. No one justified what Rubin had done, but no one dismissed it either, because deep down everyone knew this didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of verdicts that made no sense, of cameras that always failed, of policies that protected everything but the truth. Rubin Carter didn't explode. He eroded, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to carry, except for balance. He left no slogans, no manifestos, no demands, only letters, only names, only silence, soaked in sorrow, and a final act that made the world look itself in the eye and not look away. The headlines changed, but not the questions. Some called him a killer, others a martyr. But across living rooms, barbershops, classrooms, and church halls, people weren't asking what Rubin Carter did. They were asking, why did it come to this? And the answer wasn't written in ink or broadcast through speakers. It was carved into the bones of every person who had ever loved someone in a world that didn't love them back. Law enforcement painted Rubin as a cautionary tale. They released statements warning of copycat events. Internal memos talked about emotional radicalization. They reminded the public, no system is perfect, but violence is never the answer. And yet, no one spoke about Isaiah. Not the governor, not the chief, not the mayor. They condemned Rubin's rage, but refused to acknowledge his reason. And that silence? It spoke louder than any siren. Meanwhile, the media couldn't decide who he was. To some, he was a symbol of how dangerous grief could become. To others, a symptom of a broken nation, a man cracked open by a justice system that never even said his son's name. Panelists debated his sanity. They tried to pinpoint the moment Rubin Carter snapped. Was it the day of his shooting? The press conference? The moment he held that white coat and realized it would never be worn? But they were missing the point. Rubin didn't snap. He unraveled, slowly, methodically, painfully, beneath a weight no parent should ever have to carry. And in living rooms across America, people nodded, quietly, bitterly, because they knew a Rubin. They had been a Rubin, a father, a mother, a sister, a neighbor, someone who followed every rule, waited, marched, voted, wrote letters, believed in the system, until the system proved again and again that belief wouldn't save them. Isaiah's mural stood untouched for months. Kids from his old block would walk by and touch the bricks. Some whispered prayers. Others just stared, because he wasn't a headline to them. He was hope, a symbol of what was possible, what had been stolen. The Isaiah Carter Future Healers Fund became more than a scholarship. It became a statement, a citywide promise that young black brilliance wouldn't be buried in silence again. The first round of recipients included a girl from Isaiah's neighborhood. She wore a borrowed lab coat to her interview. When asked what made her apply, she said, "Because Isaiah was supposed to be here. And if they took him from us, then I have to carry what he left behind." Reuben's name faded from the news, but it didn't fade from memory. Not in whispers, not in warning, not in the aching spaces left behind by men who tried so hard to be good and were punished anyway. Parents began locking eyes longer with their children. Police officers sat a little straighter in their patrol cars. Teachers paused longer before saying a name out loud in class. Because Reuben Carter left behind more than a trail. He left behind a scar. And scars don't disappear. In time, the grave markers aged. Moss grew around the edges. Grass reclaimed the soil. Seasons passed. But the story? It lingered. In every unanswered case. Every protest chant. Every late-night conversation that starts with "Did you hear about?" and ends in silence. And maybe that's what Reuben really left us. Not a blueprint. Not a warning. Not even a legacy. But a mirror. One we're still too afraid to look into. Because if we did, we have to admit something that's far more terrifying than what he did. We have to admit, we understood why. Studio microphone, they killed my son and called it policy. I killed theirs and called it pain. Not every story has heroes. Not every villain wears a mask. And sometimes, justice doesn't arrive in courtrooms or press conferences. Sometimes, it arrives wrapped in silence, grief, and a white coat that was never worn.